One hot afternoon, two sadhus entered a narrow street in the sprawling city of Mumbai. Navigating through its cobbled streets, within a few paces, they reached a small room, which they entered with crouched heads. The experience transported the sadhus back 50 years. This place, where poverty had made her residence, was so small that the sadhus were struggling to stand upright. Even though it was mid-afternoon, darkness had embedded itself throughout this place. A puny candle was lit on the sadhu's arrival. Now, the poverty was even more evident. From utensils to furnishings, from bedding to clothes, nothing was even adequate in this hut. A mere glance betrayed that anyone residing here would not be fortunate enough to even eat 2 meals in a single day. Usually, it is easy to discern the real color of something, but the sheet he asked the sadhus to sit was completely faded. The devotee accompanying the sadhus sat beside them. The house was now crowded. The sadhus installed Thakurji, performed pujan, and lit the aarti. The customary prasad he arranged was some sugar crystals in an aluminium trinket, which were readily distributed after they had been offered to Thakurji. The sadhus then prayed for his livelihood to improve. It was now time to get up and leave. Just then, the resident, who was in his 60s, stopped the sadhus. He extracted a crumpled 50-rupee note from the upper pocket of his tattered shirt, followed by a single rupee coin. His pockets were now empty. Totaling 51 rupees, he went to give this donation to the devotee accompanying the sadhus. However, the sadhus immediately gestured him to stop. "The satsang you are doing covers your donation. We cannot accept your monetary donation," they said. "Swami, Pramukh Swami Maharaj has showered immense blessings on me. I am poor, but through his grace, I am happy. He has not allowed poverty to trouble me. I learnt that his life biography is being written. Please allow me to give 51 rupees towards that cause." The eyes of the devotee and those of the two sadhus welled up with tears of emotion as these sentiments were exchanged. There was a silent yet strong feeling in awe and admiration. Similar emotions have been experienced by the many who have either met or had the darshan of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. For those who never had this opportunity, on hearing of his life story, may quite simply be amazed that such a great personality existed. One thing is for certain, that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was a guru to countless people who believed him to be a God-realized sadhu, from within whom divinity radiated.
જ્યાં પ્રમુખ સ્વામી મહારાજ સર્વોપરી ભગવાનના સર્વોપરી સંત હતા.
प्रमुख स्वामी सुखकारी, प्रमुख स्वामी सुखकारी, ये संत परम हितकारी. गाथा महापुरुषनी संत परम हितकारिणी, गाथा महापुरुषनी संत परम हितकारिणी. महापुरुषनी आछे कथा प्रमुख सुखकारी.
Pramukh Swami Maharaj, the leader of the BAPS Swaminarayan organization for over 60 years, inspired the lives of millions across the world. His life has left a lasting impression on those who have come into his company, and his story will continue to motivate generations in the years to come. This docuseries humbly attempts to share his incredible life story, which began in the year 1921. In the northwestern part of India, Gujarat, 12 kilometers southwest of the city of Vadodara, arrives the village of Chansad. An unassuming village, a quiet, peaceful landscape with a picturesque placid lake, and the distinctive rural scent in the air. The resident farming community here enjoyed a simple life, contently toiling the land and cultivating common pulses for their livelihood. Chansad, like many other villages of the time, was small, simple, and typical. And yet, this humble village had caught the eye of the sadhus of Bhagavan Swaminarayan since the late 1800s. It was also a favorite of the Gunatit Gurus. Bhagatji Maharaj graced the village a total of 32 times. Shastriji Maharaj rested here for 45 days, and Yogiji Maharaj sanctified it with his presence for one whole year.
In this holy village of Chansad, blessed by the footsteps of the Gunatit Gurus, lived a devout couple by the name of Motibai and Diwariba. Motibai had satsang from the time of Shastriji Maharaj, and he was wedded to discourses, bhajan and kirtan, and used to go frequently to the local Swaminarayan Mandir. Whenever Shastriji Maharaj came to the village, he would be there like a shadow, ready to serve Shastriji Maharaj.
Diwariba was born of Shamadbhai Desai, and they came from a village called Lacharas. She was also from a very dedicated satsang background. Her parents or her family actually originally came into contact with Bhagatji Maharaj, and since then satsang traditions had carried on in their family. A lot of devotion, lots of faith. In fact, when she married Motibhai and they moved into Chansad, Diwariba would regularly go to the mandir and also offer her services to the mandir as well. Every time the mandir needed to grind the wheat, Diwariba would actually bring home the wheat, grind it, and then take it back to the mandir. Even during the construction of the mandir in Chansad, all the ladies team, they would be involved in a lot of the construction seva as well. So Diwariba was also a very active member of that team and used to help out a lot in that as well.
When Shastriji Maharaj was building the mandir in Atladra, she had even gone there with other Mailas to take part in the construction seva. It was hard work, but she took part with bhakti, with her heart. She would also make debra for the others who joined in the seva. The entire family had strong faith in Bhagavan Swaminarayan.
Motibai's immense faith in Bhagavan Swaminarayan and Shastriji Maharaj soon became the subject of legend. For example, once Motibai's grandson, the son of his daughter, the grandson was severely ill, and everyone had lost hope. They thought that he would pass away. Motibai, he took his grandson into his lap and started chanting the Swaminarayan Dun, Swaminarayan, 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 Swaminarayan. And after a short while, the grandson recovered and he became much better. So in this way, people realized that Motibai's devotion was different.
On another incident, Diwariba got bitten by a snake. And again, everybody in the village crowded there, just worrying what to do now, because sometimes people would suggest some very unconventional household remedies. But instead of turning to anything like that or any other superstitions, what Motibai did was he made sure that they took her to the mandir, and then they all got there and, left it to the will of God, but they also prayed, and luckily she survived. But again, the family was very devout, very faithful, and they came from a very strong satsang background.
Similarly, Motibai, he was like Janak Videhi. Once he was traveling with Shastriji Maharaj, and news was given to him that one of the walls in your house, one of the walls has collapsed. At that time, Motibai, he took it on the chin, and Shastriji Maharaj himself had to ask him, don't you want to go back to Chansar to see what's happening? And Motibai responded to Shastriji Maharaj, the one who looks after everything, yourself. I have no worries because I am with you, and it will take sweet care of itself. Such was the devotion of Motibai, and such was the devotion of his wife, Diwariba.
On the 7th of December 1921, Makshar Sud Atham, Vikram Samvat 1978, a fresh winter morning dawned. And on this crystal clear blue sky morning at around 8 a.m., Motibai celebrated the birth of his youngest son by distributing sweets to everyone present.
For the people in Chansar, the moment was simply the birth of a child. But time would bear testimony to the profound impact of that moment. It was the descendants of divinity. It was the advent of auspiciousness. That dawn would eventually bring smiles to countless around the world.
But if you can imagine the river Ganga, which starts off in Gaumukh as a stream, no one would actually expect that that stream would further go on to become a huge river that would nourish millions of hectares with greenery, which would quench the thirst of millions of other people as well. And similarly with Pramukh Swami Maharaj, when he was born, he was just a little child was born. But going forward, Swami was the one that his whole life was testimony in a way where he actually nourished millions of people's lives and transformed their lives to a lot of spirituality as well.
On that morning in Chansar, there were no bugles, no drums, nor were there any banners or fanfare, no crowds, no stages, no lights, just a boy named Shanti was born to Motibai and Diwariba.
With devotional parents, 3 brothers and 6 sisters, Shantilal's home was like most homes of the time, simple and devotional.
Pramukh Swami Maharaj's childhood name was Shantilal, and a very apt name for someone like him, because he exhibited the qualities of Shanti, which means peace, non-complaining all the time. It wasn't in his nature to be complaining and all that, but he was very, very quiet, very silent, very tolerant as well.
Naturally, when young children fall ill, they would cry, they would protest, or they would ask for help. Shantilal's nature was somewhat different. His mother Diwariba recalled many years later that Shantilal never complained or protested. And she recalled a prasang when Shantilal had chickenpox, and the sores on the body, must have been very painful, yet Shantilal did not utter one word. Similarly, there was a prasang when Shantilal once had diarrhea. He had to go 10, 15, up to 20 times. He just stayed by the side of the lake because he would bathe every time he had to go. And he became so weak because of the diarrhea that he literally collapsed and he had to be carried back home. Only then did the family members find out that actually Shantilal had fallen ill and he had been suffering from diarrhea. So he was not one to gain sympathy from anyone, not one to attract anyone's attention. That was his nature.
In his childhood, Shanti spoke little. And when he did, it was always soft and polite and respectful. In fact, throughout his life, he spoke in a way that people would want to listen to him. When he spoke, people remembered the words for years. An aged Swami from the time of Shastriji Maharaj, Balkrishna Swami, was visiting Chansad for the mandir construction. Young Shantilal once asked him, "Should I call Bapuji?" Meaning, should I call my father? Many years later, Balkrishna Swami would often say that he still remembered the soft, short, and respectful sentence. Decades later, when Shanti spoke, people didn't just listen, they remembered.
From the beginning, Shantilal's disposition was calm, composed, and quiet. He was not one to be involved in any type of conflict. Himself, he used to say that I did not understand why people would need to argue. And Shantilal was such that even if there was a case for arguing with somebody, he would stay away very clearly. In fact, he used to hate quarreling, not that he ever did it himself, but even when he saw two people arguing or quarreling with each other, sometimes he would be moved to tears. He would rather tolerate than engage in any sort of argument with anyone.
During the evening aarti, Shanti would play the large drum or the jalar. During quarrels between children to play the instruments, Shanti always found a way to compromise. If someone wanted to play the drum, he would play the jalar. If someone wanted to play the jalar, he would play the drum. Throughout his life, he found ways to compromise.
Shantilal's care and compassion was not limited to humans only. For example, the family at the time, they owned some cattle, 2 milking cows and 2 oxen. And Shantilal on Sundays or his holidays would take the cattle out for grazing on the banks of the river Vishwamitri. And after lunch, at that time lunch would be done by 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, he would go to the pastures with his friends. They would also bring their own cattle. And at that time, some of the boys, for fun, they would sit on the cattle and enjoy themselves. And then they would bathe the cattle as well and sometimes play around with them in that way. Shantilal would never sit on any of the cows or the buffaloes or the oxen, thinking that it would cause them dukh or harm. That's how sympathetic and that's how kind and compassionate Shantilal was.
From childhood, he ate in moderation. At home, the family's main meal consisted of rotla made from juwar. On special occasions, though, Diwali Ba would make rotla out of wheat or millet. Sometimes she would make debra. For shak, they would most often have potatoes or giloda. From the beginning, his meals were simple and healthy. Many times, Shanti would even forget to eat. Diwali Ba would have to often remind him that you have to still eat. Never in his life did he have any quibbles about food. Never did he say that he likes this item or dislikes this item. Diwali Ba would often feed Shanti fresh milk from the buffalo they had, but Shanti didn't have much preference for milk. He would take just a little to please his mother. When Diwali Ba made Puran Poli, he would show a slight preference, but he never did ask for anything.
His mom would lovingly pack his lunchbox for him when he went to school. For example, when he went to Padra, either puri hoi ke debra, and whatever she'd pack, Shantilal would take.
Occasionally, he would also get some pocket money. And it's very interesting the comparison how kids today would also get that. But Shantilal would get some pocket money. And when he was asked, did you use that pocket money for anything else? Generally, Shantilal wouldn't use that pocket money. But when he did, he would use it to buy jalebi and share it with amongst his friends as well. Just like any other child, Shantilal was also very interested in playing sports with the other kids as well. They would normally get together near the village pond, which was near the mandir over there. They would play cricket, they would swim, they would play amli pipri, hutu tutu, kho, marbles. And one interesting fact, that Swami was very good at all this, but he was sort of ambidextrous.
Whenever Shantilal played any sports, he used his right hand predominantly, whether it be cricket or using the spinning top or flying the kite. But when it came to playing marbles, for some reason, Shantilal would use his left hand. Shantilal was an expert swimmer. The length of the lake he could easily negotiate. And also he could dive into the lake. Even if the well was 20 foot deep, he could go down and still be able to swim very comfortably. I remember a prasang from 2014 or 2015 when Bapa was in Saranpur. He was on his bed, sitting up, and santos were asking him about the lake in Chansad. So at that time, Bapa said a prasang that in those days, what was competition? Someone would throw a coconut and then the boys would race to see who could grab the coconut first. And Bapa remembered the name of one of the boys. He called him Chanyo or Chotu. And Bapa said we would all race to get the coconuts. Either he would be first or I would be first. So that's how adept Swami Shri was at swimming.
The quiet and yet smart and popular Shantilal was like his parents, devotional and attached to Shastriji Maharaj. Yogiji Maharaj recalls the moment he took Shantilal to meet Shastriji Maharaj for the very first time at Makarpara station.
મેં સ્વામીને વાત કરી કે આ સાંસદથી મુક્તરાજ આવ્યા છે. આપણા ડબ્બામાં બોલાવો. પછી હું બોલાવેલા અને સ્વામી પછી મૂક્યા. કાળો કોટ પહેરેલો ને બધું ધામધૂમ. ચોથી અંગ્રેજી ભણતા હતા. સ્વામી પૂછ્યું પછી ભણવું છે હજી મારે ઇંગ્લિશ ભણવું છે. સ્વામી ભણો પણ રવા દો ને આવી સેવામાં આવી જાઓ. જયારે પહેલા ભણીને આવે સ્ટાર્ટની વાત. આ તો સુપ્રસંગ.
For Shantilal, meeting Shastriji Maharaj was one of the most memorable and historic moments of his childhood. In addition to Shastriji Maharaj coming to Chansad, his sadhus such as Mota Akshar Swami, Gansham Swami, they would often come to Chansad. Whenever the sadhus came, he would make the mandir his home and constantly be in their seva. And it was from these sadhus that he first learned the arti at a very young age and learned kirtans such as Akshar Pushottam, Dayaru Prabhu Akshar Pushottam, and his favorite bhajan, Joi Murti Manoharatari.
There was a Swaminarayan Mandir in Chansad, and Shantilal used to often visit that mandir. Actually, it was like a second home for him because him and some of his friends would regularly go to the mandir. They would normally join in arti, singing the bhajans, listening to katha, things like that.
Shantilal was also part of a bhajan mandiri. This was a Ubi bhajan mandiri. They would stand and swing and sway and offer devotion by singing bhajans. So Shantilal would often take the kartal in his hands and then sing as well. And sometimes this would go on till 12 at night, even 2 a.m. at night. Such was his devotion and love for bhajans, and also going to the mandir for darshan.
He had a friend named Shanti that lived across the road from where he was living. And both of these boys would actually go to a Satnarayan Mandir also, which was also in the village, where there was a Babaji who would often do katha. And in his discourses, he would actually talk about Rishikesh and Haridwar.
And at that time, Shantilal, our Shantilal, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and the friend Shantilal, they both decided together that when we finish our studies and when we grow up, we will also go to these places and dedicate our lives to the devotion of God.
ત્યાં મંદિરો હતા એટલે મંદિરોમાં દર્શન કરવા જવાનું થાય. સ્વામિનારાયણનું મંદિર તો હતું જ, ત્યાં તો નિયમિત જ જતો. પહેલેથી સત્સંગ એટલે જવાનું જ હોય. ઘરેથી પણ આજ્ઞા હોય કે મંદિર જે આવ્યા કેમ પૂછે, સ્કૂલેથી આવ્યા હોય તો પણ પછી જવાનું. એટલે એ રીતે દર્શન ત્યાં કરવાનું નિયમિત હતું. સાથે સાથે બીજા મંદિરો જે હોય એ જે સત્યનારાયણનું મંદિર હતું, રણછોડજીનું મંદિર હતું અને હનુમાનજીનું મંદિર ત્યાં ખાસ જતો હતો. ત્યાં એક બાવાજી હતા અને ખૂબ સારી રીતે વાત કરતા. હરદ્વાર ને ઋષિકેશ ને બધા ત્યાં સંન્યાસી મહાત્માઓ ને બધાની વાત, અને ત્યાં બહુ મહાત્માઓ રહે છે અને ખૂબ સારું એ થાય છે. એટલે વાત સાંભળીને જરા વિચારો થયેલા કે આપણે ભણી અભ્યાસ કરીને પછી ઋષિકેશ જવું અને ત્યાં રહીને તપશ્ચર્યા કરીને ભગવાનને રાજી કરવા, એવા વિચારો હતા જ.
Apart from his bhakti, Shantilal's dharma and his vairagya also stood out. His dharma, his niyam dharma was perfect, and his detachment set him apart from the other children.
The family had actually eventually moved to a nearby town called Rajnagar. And Shantilal's family, Motibai and everybody, had spent about 9 years in Rajnagar. So that's where he spent some time of his childhood. And in that village, there was a man by the name of Chota Kaka. He was very fond of, he would like to look after all the children. And many a time he would actually bring kites during Uttarayan so that the kids would actually be able to fly their kites. During Diwali, he would bring fireworks, and so the kids could actually play with fireworks, and basically so that the kids can have a good time. On one occasion, he wanted to throw a party for all the kids. So he made some food and he brought it for the kids, invited everybody over. And as they were feeding everything, and he brought something for Shantilal. But when he offered something to Shantilal, Shantilal denied and said, "Look, I don't want to eat anything today." And everybody was wondering why. And so Chota Bhai asked, why don't you want to eat right now? And Shantilal said, "It's Ekadashi, it's Agyaras, I'm fasting today." And so for a little child to be fasting was not that common. And so everybody said, "Look, you're just a little child, there's no need to fast right now." And they sort of pressured him further to break his fast and just eat the food. When the pressure was a little bit stronger, so Shantilal ended up, he actually had tears in his eyes.
And when Chota Kaka noticed tears in Shantilal's eyes, he decided, okay, look, this is not right to force a child like this. And he arranged for Ferrari items to be given to Shantilal to eat while the other children enjoy themselves eating the non-Ferrari food. So in this way, you could see that Shantilal was very firm at this young age in observing the niyam of Ekadashi. Shantilal had no inclination, had no interest in seeing anything worldly. Shantilal's house is at the entrance of the village, opposite the village square. In those days, entertainers used to come to various villages, entertain for a while, and then leave. And naturally, all the villagers would be drawn to these entertainers. Even though Shantilal's house was just opposite the village square, he would never be interested in going and seeing what was happening. Also in Vadodara, every Dashera in those days, there was a royal procession. Shantilal had no interest. Everyone would go from Chansed to go and see the procession. Shantilal, he was not interested. Once by chance, when he did go to Vadodara, he did see the procession, but that was by and by.
There's a common misconception that those who are religious are not so academically inclined. And vice versa, those who are academically smart aren't always very religious. Shantilal shred that misconception to pieces. Even as a child, his life was filled with devotion and austerities, but this was never to the detriment of his schooling. Quite the opposite, in fact. His love for God helped him focus and become a better student.
He actually excelled both in formal education and informal spirituality. he was equally at home in the classroom as well as in the village temple.
Shantilal began his primary education in a very modest makeshift school in Chansad. Every morning, he and his many classmates would arrive, eager to learn from their teachers. And at the end of each day, the boy who had scored the highest in the tests would have the distinct honor of leading the class out. Invariably, this would be Shantilal, or sometimes his friend Jonilal. Shantilal was a very bright student.
He was clever, extremely clever at studies, and never feared exams. Why? Because he was always well prepared.
He worked hard, always being sure to complete his homework and revise his notes before the end of each school day.
કેટલાક છોકરાઓને એવું હોય છે કે હજુ આપણે ટાઈમ છે એટલે પરીક્ષાના ટાઈમ વખતે જ વાંચવાનું કરે અને એ વખતે બધું ઘણું વાંચવાનું કરી નાખે કે આટલું વાંચી નાખો આ વાંચી નાખો આ વાંચી નાખો એટલે બધું એ થાય પણ પહેલેથી જો ક્રમથી જ 2-3 મહિના પહેલાંથી તૈયારી આપણી ચાલુ થઈ હોય તો પરીક્ષા વખતે આપણને બહુ બોજો ના લાગે.
Shantilal was meticulous and particular. Sometimes he would go over to his friend Chunilal's home for a sleepover, where they would study till 1 at night. When it was exam time, he would answer every question in order.
Years later, when he was once asked, "Were you ever afraid of exams at school?" "Afraid? Why should I be afraid?" he asked in return. "If you've studied hard, then there's nothing to be afraid of." I would answer each question in order while chanting, "Swaminarayan, Swaminarayan."
પેપર આવે ત્યારે મહારાજ સ્વામીને સંભાળીને સ્વામિનારાયણ સ્વામિનારાયણ 5 વખત ઉચ્ચારણ કરીને ભજન કરીને પછી મહારાજની મૂર્તિ યાદ કરીને પેપર લખવાનું. એટલે એમાં તમને બધો ખ્યાલ પેપરમાં શું લખવાનું છે એની સ્મૃતિ પણ થઈ આવશે, તમે ભણ્યા છે પણ યાદ આવશે અને સારામાં સારી રીતે આપને પેપર જશે.
And obviously, when results came, it was either Shantilal or Chunilal who were first or second every time in class.
After Shantilal completed his 5th grade, his primary studies came to an unexpected halt. The next school where they taught from year 6 onwards was in a nearby village, but it simply didn't have enough students. Although Shantilal tried very hard to muster a viable cohort, in the end, it just wasn't enough. Shantilal was forced to take a gap year.
As a 10-year-old with nowhere to study, Shantilal was not one to sulk and waste time. He utilized this sudden break of 1 year to travel with the saints and serve them with devotion.
During his time on Vichan with the sadhus, Shantilal quickly adapted and learned new skills, even though this was going to be a year away from his studies. His education had not stopped. He continued learning and growing every single day. He was only around 11 at the time, but mature far beyond his years. So people always found him reliable and tremendously hardworking.
Even as a child, the words "I can't" or "I won't" never existed in his mind. Shantilal served everyone in every way.
He would join the sadhus when begging alms in various villages, or spend hours a day washing utensils and cleaning, or fetching water from the nearby well, all while learning and singing new kirtans.
Shantilal served the sadhus happily, who loved him dearly. He was quiet, calm, and hardly spoke a word, and that won every heart.
One of the sadhus that Shantilal travelled with was Ghanshyam Swami. He was somewhat of a perfectionist and a stickler for cleanliness. Once, he found that a few of the utensils that had been washed were not up to scratch. A few specks of ash had been left behind.
In those times, dishes had to be washed by ash and not soap, and it wasn't easy.
So Ghanshyam Swami shouted at Shantilal, hurling the utensils away.
But at the end of the day, it was the calm of Shantilal that made the day.
Years later, he recalled, I was always very quiet. Ghanshyam Swami used to call my name out twice, thrice. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And I would barely respond with a,
Shantilal's peace, patience, and innocence were remarkable. Once, Ghanshyam Swami asked him to go to Vadodara to buy grapes. Now, Vadodara was a big city and Chansad a tiny village. For a village boy in those times to go to a city was actually like going abroad. And Shantilal himself had never gone shopping. But to obey Swamiji's commands, he went to Vadodara. However, on returning back with fresh table grapes, Ghanshyam Swami blew his top and scolded Shantilal because actually he wanted dried grapes, raisins. Despite the fact this wasn't clarified and it wasn't Shantilal's fault, he bore the blame quietly and still continued to serve with deep love.
During this period of Vichran and Seva, there were times when Shantilal would be subjected to negative and worldly talks. He had to quickly learn how to deal with these in his own calm, quiet way. Once, the Sadhu's Vichran brought them to Anand. Here, Ghanshyam Swami sent Shantilal on an errand to a Haribhakta's house. As Shantilal got there, the lady of the house and her two daughters began teasing him, dissuading him to become a sadhu.
They would ask, "Why are you becoming a sadhu? What's wrong with your own home? Do you find it difficult to get married? And the life is not easy."
This happened a couple of times. So Shantilal began avoiding that house. He was totally disinclined to talks of a worldly life.
Such was his sincerity and integrity that he remained untouched by all negativity, whether from outside satsang or within the satsang. Once in Bochasan, an old aging sadhu who had actually cooked rotlas for Akshabram Gunatitanand Swami discouraged Shantilal from becoming a sadhu.
He told Shantilal, if you become a sadhu, you'll have to work hard and travel from village to village. Who's going to look after you here? Instead, why don't you just stay at home? Shantilal was taken aback. This is not what he had expected. But equally, he was not one to be taken in by such negativity.
Shantilal confessed to Shastriji Maharaj, who once again reminded him to keep clear from any loose talks. From that day onwards, Shantilal decided to greet such people, but never meet them.
During this time in Bochasan, there lived an elderly man by the name of Prabhudas Barot. This man, as naive as he was, harbored grand delusions of helping people enter into samadhi, the climax of yogic sadhana. Once, Prabhudas got a hold of Shantilal and implored him, "Here, sit down with me. I'll show you what samadhi is." It was an enticing offer. Naturally, out of curiosity and partly also out of respect for an elderly gentleman, Shantilal sat down, cross-legged, eyes closed. As he sat there for a few minutes, Nirgun Swami passed by and saw Shantilal in this meditative pose. "Shanti," he called out, "what do you think you're doing here?" Shantilal opened his eyes and innocently replied, "This Bhagat has said he's going to show me samadhi." Hearing this, Nirgun Swami became annoyed. He scolded Prabhudas and told Shantilal to get up. Soon, news of this reached Shastriji Maharaj.
Shastriji Maharaj called the innocent Shantilal and asked him that what did you hope to see in samadhi? He said, "I would want to see my Guru and my God." That's when Shastriji Maharaj explained that when you can see your Guru and God in him with your eyes open just before you, why would you want to close your eyes? And he explained that the real samadhi is obeying the Guru, knowing the Guru.
Realize this, and you'll have all the spiritual experience and peace you can ever imagine. It was another valuable lesson Shastriji Maharaj imparted to his young, beloved disciple. Shantilal duly never wished for samadhi again, knowing he was absolutely fulfilled by his Guru alone. Shastriji Maharaj had recognized Shantilal as a special personality, destined for greatness. He personally worked to build Shantilal's physical strength and mental resolve.
Often seen as soft and shy, Shantilal had the stamina of never quitting and never giving up. His very first fast without water was really tough.
Along their travels, Shantilal arrived with the sadhus at Vaso, where they met Shastriji Maharaj. During this time, Ekadashi arrived, a day of fasting. Shastriji Maharaj asked young Shantilal to observe a waterless fast. Shantilal had never done this before, but was eager to please his Guru. Nevertheless, going a whole day without food or even a drop of water, it proved extremely arduous. But Shantilal was never one to give up in the face of adversity. He soldiered on till the end of the day, completing a full waterless fast. The following morning, after his daily puja, Shastriji Maharaj came to Shantilal to help him break his fast. He lovingly fed him khichdi and chash. But the after effects of the fast were still strong. Shantilal vomited out everything that he had just eaten. It wasn't until Shastriji Maharaj gave him some milk with mint that he fully recovered. In this way, Shastriji Maharaj lovingly trained young Shantilal in the ways of a sadhu and tap, devotional austerities. Obediently, Shantilal would go on to observe such waterless fasts for the next 6 decades. After another round of Vichran, Shantilal arrived in Bochasan again. When Shastriji Maharaj arrived there too, just before the festival of Guru Purnima, Akshar Swami, one of Shastriji Maharaj's most respected and dedicated sadhus, brought young Shantilal to Shastriji Maharaj. "This boy is worthy of becoming a sadhu," he told Shastriji Maharaj. Shastriji Maharaj gleamed. He had long envisioned this himself. "Indeed he will," Shastriji Maharaj replied. "But first, we must ensure he studies well." And immediately, Shastriji Maharaj assigned Shantilal a Sanskrit table of words to memorize. Within half an hour, Shantilal was back, every word perfectly committed to memory. Shastriji Maharaj was impressed and greatly pleased.
Remembering that moment when he had personally blessed the newborn Shantilal and prophetically told his father, Motibai, that Shantilal is ours, one day offer him to us. And this day, Shastriji Maharaj once again declared that Shantilal will one day become a Shastri, a great scholar, and will shine forth as a bright sadhu. One prophecy was fulfilled, another was made.
Spending time in Vichran during the gap in his studies, the young Shantilal's affection towards his Guru Shastriji Maharaj grew stronger. Experiencing the growing changes in the nearby towns and cities, as he accompanied Shastriji Maharaj in his travels, the young Shantilal learnt valuable lessons and grew firm in his faith. After almost a year's gap, plans for his higher schooling in Padra were arranged, and Shantilal, with the blessings of Shastriji Maharaj, returned home to begin his 6th schooling year.
Once when he was in Bochasan, his father came. His father asked Shastriji Maharaj that there's a chance for Shantilal to go to the school in Padra, the English school. Is it okay? And Shastriji Maharaj was happy. He gave his consent. So Shantilal was then due to study in Padra. Unfortunately, there was a slight problem. The distance between Chansad and Padra was 5 to 6 kilometers. And at that time, Shantilal did not have a bicycle of his own. But fortunately, his friends, Shantilal and Murji, they both reassured him that you can hitch a ride with us. So in that way, Shantilal started going to Padra on the back of the bicycles of either Shantilal or Murji.
Sometimes Shantilal would actually walk. It was a total of 10 to 12 kilometers, the walk that he would actually have to do. So sometimes he would actually walk to Padra and back.
But even then, that had zero effect on his excellence in studies. This was the English Standard 1. His favorite subjects were Gujarati, geography, history, and mathematics. And especially in history and mathematics, he would always be number 1 when it came to examination results. After a short while, his family, they bought a bicycle for him, some 15 rupees it cost, a Hercules bicycle at that time.
સાયકલ ઉપર બેસતા હતા સાયકલ તે દાડે એ તો પછી થયું પણ પહેલા જે કરતા હતા એની વાત કે સાયકલ ઉપર એટલે સાયકલ કેટલા રૂપિયાની હતી તે દાડે એટલે એનાથી પહેલા તો એનાથી 25માં મળતી હતી 20માં મળતી હતી નવી અમારા જમાનાની વાત કરું સારામાં સારી મળતી સર્ક્યુલર્સ ને રોયલર્સ ને બધી ગાડીઓ બહુ સસ્તી એકદમ રહેતી હતી અને આ તો પછી એમની સસ્તી ખરી પણ પછી પેલા હું સેકન્ડ હેન્ડ મળે ને ત્યારે હું સેકન્ડ હેન્ડમાં જ લીધો હતો મારે પાસે એવું જ હતું આવી મોટી વાત કરીએ ખરી પણ સેકન્ડ હેન્ડ જ ફરતા હતા કારણ પરિસ્થિતિ આપણી એવી ને પછી.
And Shantilal would use that bike to go to school, and he would park it. There was a workshop on the outskirts of the village. He would park his bike there, and he would come there for lunch.
And once Pramukh Swami was asked, did you ever fall as a child when you were riding your bicycle? And Swami laughed, saying, yes, of course we would fall. I never hurt myself very seriously, but yes, I did fall a couple of times.
And Papa also said, he remembered that then we got so good at riding the bike that we could also ride the bike just pedaling without keeping hands on the handlebars.
On one occasion, while he was in his 6th year of education, normally they have 6 monthly examinations, tests, and Shastriji Maharaj happened to come to Chansad at that time. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj often remembers this incident, saying that how they'd actually gone to the mandir to visit Shastriji Maharaj. And Shastriji Maharaj at that time, he very distinctly remembers Shastriji Maharaj saying to him, "Ke tare sadhu thawanu che," that we want you to become a sadhu. And at that point, Pramukh Swami Maharaj agreed, but he said, "What about my studies?" And Shastriji Maharaj said, "Look, we will make arrangements for that as well." But eventually, Shastriji Maharaj said, "Finish your exams, and then you can come with me."
And Shastriji Maharaj told Motibai, Shantilal's father, that we have to exchange a head for a head, referring to the fact that Shantilal's elder brother Nandu had also been a sadhu for 2 or 3 years. And Shastriji Maharaj mentioned that my drashti was always on Shantilal. Motibai, he readily consented, as did Diwariba, as they had both decided from the day that Shastriji Maharaj had given Vartman to Shantilal, when Shastriji Maharaj had said that he is ours and offer him to us when the time comes. So just before Shastriji Maharaj had to leave Chansad, he had to rush to Ghana. He had told Ghanshyam Swami that bring Shantilal to Bochasan once his examinations are complete. Shastriji Maharaj had left Chansad. Ghanshyam Swami was there.
However, Ghanshyam Swami also had to suddenly leave. And so Shantilal was just left wondering, what am I supposed to do now? Nevertheless, he carried on his education. That carried on for about for another year or so. But in the meantime, they would get together and the boys would just, while they're studying, another hobby they had picked up was playing cricket.
ત્યાં ગામની અંદર એક ભાઈ કલાલ કરીને આપણા માણસ હતા એ આવેલા બહારથી એક ક્રિકેટના શોખીન હતા એટલે ક્રિકેટ રમવાની બધી વાત એમને ત્યાં શરૂ કરી એટલે કોઈ એની પાસે બીજા માણસ તો મળે નહીં એટલે એટલા માટે છોકરાઓને તૈયાર કર્યા સ્કૂલના છોકરાઓ હતા અમે ભણતા એમને બધાને 10, 11, 12ને ભેગા કર્યા અને દરરોજ રમાડે ને એમ શીખવાડે ને બધું કર્યા કરતા ક્રિકેટનું એટલે પછી ક્રિકેટની અંદરનો જરા ઈચ્છા થઈ કે આપણે પણ ક્રિકેટ આ તો જતો રહેશે કાલે કારણ કે તો એ થોડા તાર માણસ નહીં એટલે આપણે કંઈ તૈયારી કરીએ એટલે બધા છોકરા ભેગા થયા કે આપણે ક્રિકેટને બધું સાધન લાવો.
And they decided to buy the cricket bats, the balls, the stumps, so that they could play independently. And they all decided that let's send Shantilal to Vadodara. He was the most trusted.
ક્રિકેટનું સાધન લેવા કોણ જાય એની અંદર પ્રસંગે એક હું હતો ને મારો મિત્ર શંકરલાલ, એને બેને થયું કે તમે 2 જણા જાઓ ને લઈ આવો. એ તૈયારી ચાલતી હતી અને એ વખતે શાસ્ત્રી મહારાજે પેલું વાત કરીને પછી તો ગયા હતા, પણ ત્યાંથી કે એમનો કાગળ ભાઈલી અમારા સંતો હતા ઘનશ્યામ સ્વામી એમની પાસે ગયો.
But this was no ordinary letter, because this letter was a letter from Shastriji Maharaj. This letter was addressed to Motibai. This letter explained that Shantilal could now renounce home and come to Shastriji Maharaj to take the robes of a sadhu. And when this message was given to Shantilal's home, Rauji Bai was told that Shantilal is with the rest of the boys on the outskirts of the village. So here's Shantilal talking with his friends, and Rauji Bai comes with this letter.
He gave the letter to Shantilal, and the letter was from Shastriji Maharaj instructing him that now it's time for you to leave home and come and become a sadhu.
And Shantilal, his immediate response, yes, I am ready. Nothing less, nothing more.
He told his friends that this is it, now I'm going. And they said, where are you going? And he says, well, Shastriji Maharaj is actually calling me, and so this might be our last visit, last meeting. Well, what about the cricket equipment?
He gave that responsibility to Shankarlal and said, look, I have to leave. My guru is calling me. And so, on the basis of just one letter, Matra Ek Patra, Shantilal decided there and there to renounce his home, his family, his relatives, and his village of Chansad to join his Guru Shastriji Maharaj.
In this way, on the basis of merely one plain letter from Shastriji Maharaj, Shantilal, with single focus and determination, acts immediately. Who was to know that the handwritten letter would in time not only change Shantilal's life, but the lives of millions across the globe? Who was to know that Shantilal's simple decision would in time touch so many in years to come? How this one act of leaving home for Shantilal would in time have a ripple effect and make him part of millions of homes across the world over. In the next episode, we continue Shantilal's journey towards Diksha. The trials he faces, the emotions of leaving home, and the sentiments of being reunited with his Guru Shastriji Maharaj, his anticipation of being initiated into sainthood, and the changes to come. How does Shantilal fare? Join us next time for episode 2, Diksha.
મને તો એમ જ થયા કરે છે કે આપણા કેવા ભાગ્યનો પાર આવે એમ નથી કે પ્રમુખ સ્વામી જેવા ગુરુનો યોગ થયો. તેઓએ આપણને સૌને નિહાલ કર્યા છે. એ અનુભવ આ જીવન ચરિત્ર વાંચતા વિશેષ દૃઢ થશે. આ વાંચતા ખૂબ જ આનંદ થશે. સ્વામી બાપા નજર આગળ તરવરવા લાગશે.
कैसा जादू आप मिले हो स्वामी, कैसा जादू आप मिले स्वामी हम पे किया, हर खुशी से हमारा जीवन भर दिया स्वामी, भर दिया. दिल में तेरे लिए कुर्बानी रहे प्रमुख स्वामी, तुम्हारी कहानी रहे. जब तक धरती पे सूरज की रोशनी रहे, ये सितारे और चांद की वो चांदनी रहे. प्रमुख स्वामी तुम्हारी कहानी रहे. प्रमुख स्वामी तुम्हारी